There is a strange moment hidden inside real pain that almost nobody talks about. Not ordinary frustration, not a bad day. Something deeper than that. Something that reaches into you and rearranges parts of you thought were fixed. Something that genuinely hurts. And somewhere inside that hurt, there can be a moment that feels almost unsettling. You notice yourself crying. You become aware of your own face. A part of you seems to step slightly outside the experience and simply watch. Watching how you sound, watching how you look, watching yourself suffer while you are still inside the suffering itself. And then another feeling arrives. Not sadness this time, guilt. Because if some part of you was watching all of it happen, if some part of you was aware of the scene while you were living through it, then a question begins to appear. Was any of it real? Was I performing? Was I somehow pretending, even to myself? The answer is no. But understanding why means looking at something very strange about the architecture of consciousness itself. The split we rarely notice. Human beings live with a quiet division inside them almost all the time, though most people rarely notice it. Psychology sometimes describes it as self-consciousness in a more technical sense, not social anxiety, not feeling awkward in public, something much stranger. The experience of being both the person having an experience and the person observing it at exactly the same time. Usually it stays hidden. You do not normally catch yourself watching yourself laugh at a joke. You do not sit at dinner noticing yourself enjoying food. Life simply unfolds and you move through it. But strong emotions change that. And grief, loss, heartbreak, these are among the strongest emotional states a person can experience. Intensity makes the machinery visible. Suddenly the observer steps forward. Suddenly you notice the watcher that was there all along. And almost everyone interprets this backwards. People assume that if an observing part exists, then the feeling itself must somehow be less real. That genuine grief should swallow a person completely. That true pain should leave no distance at all, no observer, no awareness, no part left standing outside the experience. But human minds do not work that way. The observer is not evidence against the feeling. The observer is part of how the feeling exists at all. The self that is always performing. Sociologist Erving Goffman spent much of his work studying something most people never notice. The fact that human beings are constantly presenting versions of themselves to the world. Different versions with friends, different versions with family, different versions at work, different versions alone. And what made his work so fascinating was not the idea that people perform socially. Most people already suspect that. It was something deeper. He argued that there is not some completely pure self hidden backstage underneath every performance. There are simply different versions of self moving between different audiences, including an audience of one, yourself. That changes the entire picture. Because when you catch yourself adjusting your expression during grief, noticing your tears, becoming aware of your own sadness, it does not mean a fake version of you interrupted the real one. It means the social dimension of being human, the part that has always existed quietly beneath awareness, suddenly became visible. The performance was not added to the grief. The grief simply made you notice it. Psychology also offers another way of understanding this. Some clinicians describe something called the observing ego, a part of the mind capable of stepping back from experience and saying, this is happening, I am feeling this, I am hurting right now. Without this function, emotional life would become overwhelming. Without some observing capacity, grief would simply consume the person entirely. There would be no ability to process it, no ability to describe it, no ability to understand it, no ability to eventually survive it. Researcher Peter Fonagy expanded this idea through what he called mentalization, the capacity to understand feelings as experiences rather than as reality itself. To say, I feel abandoned, instead of, I am abandoned. To say, I feel hopeless, instead of, hope no longer exists. That difference sounds small, it is enormous, because the observer creates space. And space is what actually allows emotion to move, rather than trap us inside itself. So the watcher inside you during grief is not a traitor. It is not proof of dishonesty. It is one of the things making the experience possible in the first place. There is another phenomenon that reveals this even more clearly. Some people experience something called alexithymia, difficulty identifying and describing emotions. They feel distress in the body, pressure, tension, weight, but cannot easily translate it into words like sadness, fear, grief, loneliness, which reveals something important. Human beings do not simply feel emotions automatically in a finished form. The mind has to interpret sensation. It has to translate experience into meaning. Raw pain becomes grief. Raw tension becomes fear. Raw emptiness becomes loneliness. And the observing self is part of that translation. Most of the time, the process happens silently. You never notice it. But in moments of overwhelming feeling, the machinery becomes visible, and suddenly you can feel the mind working in real time, not because something is wrong, because something very human is happening. There is another layer hidden underneath all of this. We inherit emotional rules long before we realize they exist. Rules about what sadness should look like, how grief should sound, how long pain should last, when tears are acceptable, when they are not. These rules come from families, from culture, from childhood, from watching other people. Eventually, they stop feeling like rules at all. They start feeling like instinct. And so during grief, some quiet part of the mind may begin checking. Am I reacting correctly? Am I showing enough? Too much? Not enough. Again, this does not mean the grief is false. It means human emotion has never existed outside of relationship. Even alone, we carry the voices of other people with us. There is also something much older beneath all of this. Human beings evolved as social creatures. Emotions were never only private experiences. They were signals. Pain signaled danger. Fear signaled threat. Grief signaled loss. Visible emotion helped others understand when someone needed help, needed comfort, needed protection. So perhaps the watcher inside you is not checking whether the pain is real. Perhaps it is checking something much older. Can this pain be seen? Can it be recognized? Would another human understand it? Would anyone come if they saw it? Because somewhere deep inside us remains an ancient part that still believes suffering is meant to be witnessed. The part of you that watched yourself during your worst moments was never evidence that your suffering was fake. It was evidence that you are a creature capable of experiencing something and knowing simultaneously that you are experiencing it. That is not dishonesty. That is consciousness. Grief does not become less real because you noticed yourself grieving. If anything, that noticing is what eventually allows grief to become something survivable, something nameable, something shareable, something that slowly, quietly moves through you instead of remaining trapped inside you forever. You were not performing. You were doing the strange, layered, deeply human thing that conscious minds do. You were hurting, and you were aware that you were hurting. That is not a flaw in the design. That is the design. Until the next one.